Ever put in those extra hours at work and then looked at your payslip wondering, hang on, am I actually getting paid what I'm owed for this? Well, in this explainer, we're cutting through all the noise to give you the official rules on overtime pay in South Africa, so you know exactly where you stand.
Yeah, the answer can be surprisingly tricky, and a lot of people aren't 100% sure what their rights are. Our goal here is simple, to give you the clarity you need. So, let's dive right in.
Okay, so before we can even get into overtime, we first have to agree on what normal time actually is according to the law. And it all boils down to one very important number.
And that magic number is 45. That's it. According to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, or the BCEA, your standard work week cannot go over 45 hours. Anything beyond that is officially overtime. But how that breaks down each day also really matters. So if you work a typical 5-day week, Monday to Friday, your standard day is maxed out at 9 hours. But if your work is spread out over 6 days, that daily maximum actually drops to 8 hours. It's all just simple math to make sure you hit that 45-hour weekly limit and not a minute more.
All right, so we've got our baseline for normal hours. Now let's get into the rules for working beyond them. And the very first rule is probably the most important one, and one that so many people just don't know about.
Here it is, and this is huge. Overtime has to be voluntary. Your employer cannot force you to work extra hours. It must be a mutual agreement. This is a fundamental protection for you, and it means your consent is always key. And even when you do agree, the law sets some really firm boundaries to protect you from burnout. On any single day, you cannot work more than 3 hours of overtime. Period. And that daily limit fits into an equally strict weekly cap of 10 hours. These boundaries aren't just suggestions, okay? They are legal protections put in place to shield you from excessive work demands.
All right, this is the part we've all been waiting for. I know. You've agreed to the extra hours, you've worked within all the legal limits, so how does the pay work? Let's break down exactly how you get compensated.
The pay rates are actually very clear. For standard, run-of-the-mill overtime, you must be paid at 1.5 times your normal hourly wage. But if you're asked to come in on a Sunday or a public holiday, that rate doubles. That higher rate is there specifically to compensate you for giving up your personal time.
But interestingly, it doesn't always have to be cash in hand. If you both agree to it, you can opt for paid time off instead. The calculation is pretty simple. For every hour of overtime you work at that 1.5 times rate, you'd get 90 minutes of paid leave. But I'll say it again, this can only happen if you agree to it.
So we've gone through the hours, the agreement, and the pay. It all sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Well, hold on. Here comes the single most important detail in South Africa's overtime law, a detail that determines if any of these rules actually apply to you. It's something called the BCEA earnings threshold. This is basically an annual salary figure that the government sets and updates. Think of it like a line in the sand. If you earn below this amount, you are protected by all the overtime laws we've just talked about. If you earn above it, well, things are very different.
And this is that great divide. If your salary is below the threshold, all those rules on pay rates and limits are legally yours. It's the law. But if you earn above that threshold, you aren't automatically entitled to overtime pay. Now, they still can't force you to work the extra hours, but any kind of compensation for it is something you have to negotiate and get written into your employment contract.
Knowing which side of that line you're on is absolutely critical. So if you suspect your employer isn't following the rules, what are your next steps? Let's get into the actions you can actually take.
First things first, it's really important to know the correct term for it. If your employer forces you to work overtime or doesn't pay you correctly and you fall under that threshold, it's legally defined as an unfair labor practice. Just knowing that term is the first step in standing up for yourself.
The process for getting it sorted out follows a pretty clear path. Step 1. Confirm you actually have an issue. Check your contract, check your pay slips, and compare them against the BCEA rules. Step 2. Lodge a complaint. Formally bring up the issue with your boss or with HR. If that doesn't fix it, then you move to Step 3. Seek mediation. This is where you refer the dispute to the CCMA, and they'll help mediate a solution.
And that brings us to the end. We've covered the hours, the rules, the pay, and that all-important earnings threshold. So the final question really goes back to you. With all this knowledge in your pocket, take a close look at your own situation. Is your paycheck really adding up?